All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order Planning and Development Committee meeting of Monday, December 11th, 2023. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendourong, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we're moving to the statutory public meeting. We will now move into the public meeting for draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment applications for 165 Lake Street. The premise of this public meeting is to provide the opportunity for the public to provide input on the proposed application. I would like to stress that there have been no decisions or recommendations made by council or planning staff on these applications. This meeting is conducted in accordance with the town's procedural bylaw. All participants are asked to conduct themselves with decorum and respect and provide the opportunity for all members of the public to express their opinion in an environment of tolerance on all points of view and free of intimidation. The intent is to create a venue to encourage people to participate in the process and provide their input. If a person or a public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Town of Grimsby to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is adopted, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is adopted, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. With us this evening is Ryan Ferrari, AJ Clark and Associates, planning staff in attendance, Kayla Horton, planner, and Walter Basic, assistant director of planning. Tonight we will start off with staff providing a brief presentation outlining the process and the application. Next, the consultant team will provide an overview of the proposal and that will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you have not already done so, please ensure you've signed in so you'll be informed of future meetings on this proposal. As we navigate the public meeting, we asked all participants for your patience. Each participant will be called in order and will be provided 10 minutes to speak. Each presenter may speak only once. If you hear your comment presented by someone else, please do not duplicate the remarks. All of the comments are being recorded and will be taken into consideration. When you are called, we ask you to state your name and address. Persons addressing council should confine their remarks to the business at hand and shall direct their comments or questions to the chair. Staff are taking notes of all the questions asked this evening. At the end of the delegations, the consultant will be asked to respond to all of the questions or comments raised. If you feel that your questions have not been responded to this evening, you can email our planning department at planning@grimsby.ca. Welcome, Kayla, for the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kayla Horton, and I am a planner with the town. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your schedules to join us for this public meeting. The project to be discussed this evening is the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision applications for the properties at 165 Lake Street. Next slide, please. To begin this public meeting, I will be going through a short presentation, providing you all with some insight into the planning process of this application and briefly introduce what is proposed for the site. Next slide, please. Just to go over the purpose of the meeting tonight, we would like to provide you all with an overview of the planning process for these types of applications. This includes the process from start to finish and where exactly the town is in this process. An overview of the policy and regulatory framework will also be provided, including the relevant official plan policies and zoning provisions that are in place. Agency feedback that has been provided will be touched upon. Mr. Ferrari will provide you with some additional details about the proposal, and finally, we are here to answer any questions that you may have and gather any feedback. This feedback will also be taken into consideration and identify any potential revisions that may be needed. Next slide, please. So why can plans or bylaws change? Under the Planning Act, authority is provided to submit applications for development plans that may not meet the current official plan or zoning bylaw. The town's role is to process these applications that come in. These applications are only able to amend the official plan or zoning bylaw if it is determined that the proposed changes comply with the overall intent of the official plan, and the result of these changes is a development that is compatible with the surrounding area. Next slide, please. Here is a flowchart that outlines the major milestones in the planning process. An application for a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision all begin with a pre-consultation meeting with town staff and any relevant agencies, such as the Region and Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, for examples. This meeting outlines the requirements a potential applicant would need to submit for an application submission. The pre-consultation meeting for 165 Lake Street was held in the summer of 2021. Once an application is ready, the applicant submits the required documents and fees to the town for review for completion. Upon the completion, a notice is sent out and agencies are asked for comments. Comments have been provided for the first submission of this proposal. The public is also able to provide comments at this time and continue to do so until a decision on the application has been made. For this application, any documents related to the proposal are posted on the current planning applications page of the town's website. All notices for public meetings are also posted on this page and on the town notices page. We are currently at the public meeting stage, which provides an opportunity for comments to be made about the application. At this stage, initial agency comments have been provided, with revisions potentially being done at this stage. Any revision would be made to the application to address any concerns from agencies, town staffs, or members of the public. After the public meeting and analysis and revisions, staff will prepare a recommendation report for council regarding the application in accordance with the prescribed timelines of the Planning Act. A decision on the application would be made at a future council meeting, with the opportunity to appeal the decision afterwards. Next slide, please. The planning process is an open process, so it allows the public to have a say. The public meeting is one of the opportunities to give your opinion on this application. Additionally, you can write a letter or email addressed to the planning department to provide comments. The email is planning@grimsby.ca. You can also send a copy of your letter or email to your councilors as an alternative. Comments will continue to be accepted until the staff recommendation report is prepared. Next slide, please. To stay informed about this application, you are invited to provide your mailing address to the planning department. By doing so, you would receive any notice of future meetings, information on how to obtain a staff report, information on speaking in front of the committee, and information on how a decision on the application can be appealed. Next slide, please. Now let's look more closely into this proposal. The surrounding area is characterized by Lake Ontario, existing residential development, the Grimsby wastewater treatment plant, a place of worship, and public parks as shown on the image on the screen. Next slide, please. The subject lands are a rectangular-shaped parcel located on the north side of Lake Street along the shore of Lake Ontario and are comprised of the lands municipally known as 165 Lake Street and the adjacent vacant parcel to the west. The subject lands are comprised of two separate lands as shown on the screen. The site is currently occupied by a single detached dwelling with associated accessory structures, an in-ground swimming pool, and multiple existing trees. West of the subject property along the shoreline of Lake Ontario is public access to the waterfront as shown on the slide. Next slide, please. Moving on to the proposal, this slide shows the preliminary draft plan of subdivision. The applicant is proposing a zoning bylaw amendment and a one-block draft plan of subdivision to facilitate the proposed development, which I will show on the next slide. Next slide, please. The proposed development is to create 31 new residential dwellings, which include 24 semi-detached dwellings and 7 single-detached dwellings. The proposed zoning would be amended from the residential detached 2, RD 2.35, and neighborhood development ND to multiple residential, otherwise known as RM1 zone. A future condominium application will be related to these applications in which a common element condominium road would loop through the site. The applicant's presentation will provide more detail on the proposed development concept. Next slide, please. The subject lands are outlined in red on the slide shown on the screen. The subject lands are designated low-density residential area, which is the yellow shaded area, and environmental conservation area, the green shaded area, with a hazard land overlay, which is the black diagonal pattern area in the town official plan. The policies for the low-density residential area designation is located in section 3.42 of the official plan. This designation permits a mixture of residential uses, including single detached and semi-detached dwellings. It is considered a stable residential neighborhood, but does allow for limited development, evolution, and rejuvenation. The policies for the environmental conservation area designation is located within section 3.12 of the official plan. Lands designated as environmental conservation area form part of the natural heritage system and represent significant natural features and core natural areas within the town, including key natural heritage features and key hydrologic features within the Greenbelt Plan. Development and site alteration must demonstrate through an environmental impact study, otherwise known as an EIS, that over the long term, there will be no significant negative impact on natural features or ecological functions on adjacent lands. The policies for the hazard land overlay are found in section 3.2 of the official plan. The hazard land overlay represents areas that have inherent physical hazards, such as flood susceptibility, steep slopes, erosion susceptibility, or other physical conditions which is severe enough to cause property damage and/or potential loss of life if the lands were to be developed with habitable buildings or structures. As such, flood and erosion-prone lands along the shore of Lake Ontario is included in this overlay. Next slide, please. As stated earlier, the subject lands are currently zoned neighborhood development ND and residential detached 2 RD 2.35 with a hazard land overlay zone HA. The hazard land overlay zone is shown in light gray in the image on the screen. The neighborhood development zone permits existing uses and existing zone regulations. The residential detached 2 RD2 zone permits a range of residential uses with a 35% lot coverage. The hazard overlay zone restricts development, and the provisions of the overlay zone supersede the provisions of the underlying zone. Permitted uses, among others, include flood and erosion protection work, parks, and conservation use. The application for a zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning to multiple residential 1, RM1, with site-specific modifications in place to facilitate the development of 31 new residential units. Proposed modified performance standards include additional permitted uses for single detached dwellings and an accessory amenity building, maximum building height, minimum lot area, minimum lot frontage, maximum lot coverage, minimum front yard, minimum exterior yard, and minimum rear yard. Please note that the application for a zoning bylaw amendment does not remove the hazard land overlay zone. Next slide, please. The applications were circulated to external agencies and internal departments for review and comment. A full comments matrix of all agency comments is provided in Appendix F of Staff Report PA 2341. Comments include conditions of draft plan approval of subdivision, technical comments related to grading, servicing, drainage, and other impacts were also provided to the applicant, among others. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your presentation, Kayla. Up next, we have Ryan Ferrari from AJ Clark. Good evening, Ryan.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. Just give me 1 second to set up here, and we'll get started. Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. As Kayla mentioned previously, my name is Ryan Ferrari. I'm a registered professional planner with AJ Clark & Associates. Just for those in attendance today, my role in this application is I'm a planner. I'm the agent on the application. I've been hired by the developer to advance these applications through the development process with the town of Grimsby. So I'll try not to go through what Kayla went through too much. But what I wanted to note for those in attendance today is that we have Sam and Stephanie here, who are or will be the future owners of the property. So if there's any questions for them, they are certainly here to answer. Online, we also have our shoring consultant, Milo, who did a design for the new shore wall, which I'll go through in a moment. And I believe also Victor, who is also part of the development team, is on there as well. So thank you for coming out tonight. I think really the message we want to get across to the community is we're here to listen. If there's any questions that we can't answer today, we can certainly pass it along to the consultant team, but certainly we'll do our best to answer any questions of both the community members here and also the committee as well. So with that, let's get into the presentation. I'll go over a little more detail about what exactly we're proposing here. So Kayla provided a good overview of the site. I think everyone knows where we are, 165 Lake Street. It's actually technically 2 parcels of land. It abuts Lake Ontario currently, and primarily surrounded by low-density residential uses. If you go to the next slide. I want to spend a little more time about exactly what's proposed. We're proposing a draft plan of subdivision with 1 block. The reason why it's 1 block is because this block will be further subdivided at a future time to delineate individual elements of the future condominium. So I'll go through that in just a second, but I just want everyone to understand is that this is 2 applications, not just 1. It's a subdivision, technically, and a zoning bylaw amendment. So we can go to the next slide. I have a better view of our site plan, but I just want to give everyone a high-level overview of what we're proposing. So the idea being is what will be subdivided are each of the individual lots of the future units here. There will be a common element proposed, which will comprise of that private road, which there are 2 entrances onto Lake Street. And also in the top left corner there, I have a better picture in the next slide. There's going to be an amenity clubhouse, okay? Yeah, and the next slide shows that as well. So what's being proposed here are not townhomes. What is being proposed are single detached dwellings and semi-detached dwellings on these lots. The amenity clubhouse is on the top left corner there. I think if you could see, it's delineated by number 32. So what's going to be there is a fitness area and sort of a rec room area, which is the exclusive amenity for, or the intended amenity for the residents there. I also want to point out on this site plan, at the top is Lake Ontario. That blue line approximately represents where the shore is today. So what I just want to impress upon everyone is the setback between that blue line and the back of the dwellings that are proposed on this site. Will also be shoring protection works, which I'll get in a second. Primarily, these dwellings are going to be 2 stories. There will be an amenity deck on most of them, and we have a slide later on to show you where these amenity spaces are going to go, because one of the things that's important to us is mitigating any overlook conditions. I'll show you that slide in just a moment. Next slide, please. Just high level, I think it's important to highlight the process we've been through so far. As Kayla noted before, this application originally came into the town of Grimsby back in 2021. Since that time, staff gave us a whole list of studies to prepare. I won't go through exhaustively. I have the list here. They included things like an environmental study, an odor study, a shoreline protection plan, a tree protection plan, a site plan, renderings, things of that nature. Engineering plans, grading, servicing. Those questions might come up today. So all these plans have been submitted to staff as of November of this year, and they have been reviewed. But I just also want to impress upon those here in the committee today is Sam and Stephanie, they've tried their best to reach out to neighbors, especially the immediate neighbors to the east and the west of the property, to let everyone know that this development is coming through. And I know this is probably the first time everyone's seeing a lot of details, which I'll provide later on in the presentation, but it's something that I wanted to impress upon Sam and Stephanie at the beginning is to get out, talk to the neighbors, show you what we're doing. And certainly we're open to keeping a dialogue with the neighbors because my understanding it's been open so far and we want to continue that. So discussions with neighbors happened June, July of this year. We made a submission in September. We did do a site visit with MPCA staff who are the local conservation authority, with local staff as well. Park staff were there. So we've done a whole review of the subject site. We visited it, staff visited it. We know what the on-site conditions are. And then we just received staff comments a couple of weeks ago. So the goal of this meeting is to go through those staff comments from a technical perspective and receive any feedback from you folks here today. And we're going to incorporate all those comments, look at them, and provide feedback to staff after this meeting. So I just want to provide a quick overview. Next slide, please. So now, rather than, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty stuff here, and I won't get into too much detail. This is the preliminary shoring wall design. As you can see, it stretches across the site and will join up with an existing shoring wall on the east and west. So the west side has been shored and the east side has been shored. The whole purpose and intent of the shoring wall is to establish a stable top of slope from the lake. And outside of this whole development, regardless of the 31 units, this work needs to be done, okay? To shore up the wall and to provide a solid setback for the dwellings you see facing the lake. So this is a preliminary shoring design. What will happen at this point, and Milo may be able to speak to this a little bit later on, our shoring consultant. This is a preliminary design. Detailed design is going to take place through the draft plan of subdivision process and included as a condition of that draft plan. So preliminary design shown here. There's still a lot of work to be done on the shoring design. And certainly we'll look forward to working through that with staff. One thing I want to point out here, everyone sees a red line and a blue circle surrounding it. What this line represents is an existing habitat for an endangered species. They're a form of nesting birds that like to burrow holes in the side of the hill. So the current condition today, and I have a picture of this on the next slide, is it drops off as a cliff. You can sort of see this here. This is from our site visit. So these birds nest in the side of the cliff here. They burrow holes. So because these are species at risk, we do have to be mindful of them. So what our plan is we're going to recreate their habitat, shown on the next slide. So as part of that shoring wall works, and this is just an example, this is actually a stock image I just pulled up from the internet. These birds, we're going to put these hollow areas for these birds to nest in. And basically what that's going to result in is no construction can take place during breeding bird season, right? So construction can only take place in between October and March of any given year. And that's how we're mitigating for that. There is a process that goes along with this with the Ministry of Environment. So it's even above the city and the municipality's purview. But it's something we're working with the ministry on. We're going to submit what's called an overall benefit permit to them to show them how we're mitigating for this habitat. And so that's going to be another feature of the shore wall and something that we're mindful of and considerate of and want to make sure we do right. So I just wanted to note that as well. So the shore wall is a complicated thing. There's a lot of engineering that goes into it, but also we have to deal with species at risk that are on site as well. So that's a little bit about the shore wall. Next slide. Another important point. So there are a lot of trees on the site. There are a lot of boundary trees. And what I mean by boundary trees are trees that are located on common property lines. So on the left, you see pictures of the trees on the site. On the right side of this picture, which would be the east side, there are a number of shared boundary trees. Just so the committee is aware, we have reached out to the neighbors regarding these boundary trees. We will have to deal with them. The goal is to keep them. However, through construction, it's always ambiguous whether or not these trees are going to survive. Of course, we have shoring works that needs to happen. The goal is to maintain them whenever possible. There's techniques we can use like air spading and whatnot to help try to keep the trees alive. At a future date, if this application were to be approved, we would have to submit a detailed tree protection plan to show how these trees would be retained. And Sam and Stephanie have already spoken with the neighbors about talking about if there are injury or damage to these trees, how compensation works, you know, if there's new trees to be planted or monies to be owed. That's going to be between my client and the neighbor owning the property. So I just want to mention that because it is an important issue and it's something that we've tried to get ahead of as best we can. And we're going to continue to speak to our neighbors regarding the boundary trees. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the built form we're proposing here. The slide's a little bit busy, and I do have separate appendices for the slides if we want to look at them later. So what we wanted to show here is we spoke to the neighbor at 20 Jacobs Landing, and their preliminary thoughts were that we should provide a 2.4 meter fence, which we're certainly amenable to do. And if there's any tree plantings we can put on there, we can add those as well. So the bottom picture shows how that landscaping might look with the trees. There is a fence in there as well, 2.4 meters, to give that little buffer between neighbors. I'll go to the next slide because I do have better pictures of the sections here. I touched a little bit on this top floor amenity. So we've taken care to mitigate overlook on people's privacy areas. So, and it's sort of tough to see here. I wish the colors could come out nicely, but if I could just point everyone to the 4 single detached dwellings, generally on the bottom right corner of that picture. There are, perfect, thank you so much. There are amenity spaces on the top floor. They face out into the development, not out into neighboring properties. So in other words, for those 4 dwellings, no one will be able to access the roof and stand over there and look into your backyard. That's the intent. They'll be looking out towards the development. And generally, same rule applies on the other side as well. And the section at the top right corner shows you how the built form is going to be. I do have renderings in a second, but these are 2-story dwellings with a vestibule basically to access that rooftop amenity. Okay, and that vestibule is pushed into the middle of the building so that it's as far away from the edge as possible. Again, trying to mitigate any overlook concerns. Next slide, please. These are just sections. So we're looking at from the rear yards of Jacobs Landing here, what it would look like with the fence and the dwellings. And at the bottom is just a zoomed in of that top portion. Again, showing the fence and the dwellings. Next slide. And now I just want to provide some renderings. Craig is here on our team who put these together. So right now, these aren't final, obviously. These are examples of the single detached dwellings proposed, more of a contemporary design. And you can kind of see, you can kind of make out those top kind of vestibule areas that are sort of pushed back. So the idea is if you're on the street, you don't really see them. And they present as sort of 2-story dwellings. If there are any questions specifically about these, you can go to the next slide. Craig is here who designed these. And those are what we're looking at for the semi-detached dwellings. So each dwelling is going to have 2 parking spaces, 1 on the driveway, 1 proposed in the garage, and there's also visitor parking as well. So with the next slide here, I believe, there are some appendices we can go to. Is there any questions? They're just supplemental information, not necessarily part of my presentation, but if we need to refer to them, we certainly can. But at this point, I think I'm happy to stop, open to any feedback that folks want to provide, answer any questions. Like I said, we'll do our best to answer your questions today. If we can't answer them today, we'll go back to our consultant team and answer them another time as soon as possible. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your presentation, Ryan. Now we will open up to members of the public. First up, we have Richard and Linda Dunda.
Just a couple of questions.
Yeah, you go up to the podium and
One was the exterior.
yeah, you need to go up to the podium.
Hi, we just had a couple of questions about the exterior, right? Stucco, brick, whatever, because there were no renderings online. And the second one is, if I read correctly, it's 3 meters or 1 meter, 0.9 meter between dwellings. Does that include the semi-detached as well as the detached? And then I also didn't notice any extra visitor parking unless I missed it. That's it.
Thanks, Richard. Up next, we have Dennis and Debbie White.
Hi, we live on Jacob's Landing. We'd like to know when the neighbor consulting was done because we were not asked about this.
All right, that would be noted by the planner and planning staff. Any other members of the public that would like to speak tonight? All right, seeing no more members of the public wanting to speak tonight, any questions or comments from planning committee? Member Drew?
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for your presentations, and have a few questions related to it. First one relating to parking. You've identified 12 visitor parking spaces. My understanding is the zoning bylaw does not require additional parking spaces, given the parking you've described of one vehicle in a garage, one vehicle in the driveway. So the question is, are you intending to continue with that plan for those 12 parking spaces, obviously, presumably to the benefit of the household owners as well as visitors in that area? Second question relates to energy efficiency of these units. There's provisions that have been outlined related to such things as triple pane windows, better sound insulation in the walls, and better sound insulation in doors. The question is, as a result of those actions, are these units actually to a higher standard than required in terms of their energy efficiency? Third question I have relates to the groundwater study that was done, which states that groundwater runs from approximately 1.8 meters down to approximately 6.1 meters. Also, the recommendation, as I understand it, is that basement floors are to be installed at 1 meter above the groundwater. So the question is, for some of these units, particularly if the groundwater is at approximately 1.8 meters, there's still going to be ability for a standard height basement, or is this only going to leave enough clearance for potentially a crawl space or even less space than that? Thank you.
Councillor Frake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to slide 13, where you show the, I guess, the privacy fence. And on the other side of the privacy fence, you show some renderings of the height of the contemporary homes. And I see there's windows in there, and they're way up above the fence. So would not those windows be able to look into the backyards of the neighbors if they're that high above the fence? That's a question I was. So would the privacy not be kind of at risk there with that type of height? And I think that member Drew already asked questions about parking, so you got that covered. You have one slide that you didn't go to, and that was slide 18. And you seem to have, I guess, taken just plugged houses on top of the trees there. Is that the way it's supposed to look at the end? Are all those trees still going to be there? Because it's very deceiving when I look at this particular slide. And I'd just like to know what the intention is for all those trees and shrubbery that is at the back towards the lake. I assume that you're not going to be able to keep all those trees if you want to do some construction there, but by looking at that slide, it looks like the houses are going to be built around the trees. Just a question there as well. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Member Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, 4 or 5 here. The seawall or the lake wall, just clarification on the life expectancy of that and maintenance thereof. And I'm not privy to the whole shoreline liability, on whose liability that comes onto for the next 50 years, whatever, for that sort of life expectancy, making sure that that's understood. Do the birds know they're supposed to nest in this wall? And if so, what previous examples of this particular at-risk species have been known to habitate those walls, and what else needs to be done to make sure that is appropriate? I know it's Ministry of Environment, but I think it's an important question to raise. I noticed the parking also, good to see that. That comes down to, for me, if the club, I use the word clubhouse, I'm not sure if it's clubhouse, amenity house for the HOA association of this zone. But if that's a potential for rental, then I'm not sure that parking would necessarily work out. I defer to the bylaws for that on use of that facility and the need for parking as a result. If it's just for the actual owners of the actual houses in this area, the question may be a little bit mute. There were some good questions, observations from all the people that provided feedback from the various groups. The one that jumped out at me on the species selection for the plantings around there, I think nowadays, I hope we can do better with no species, invasive species nowadays. There's enough species out there that are native to this area that I'm sure we could use. And so I think the words were strongly recommended. I think that should be strongly recommended. The other thing is, I know a little bit about trees. I hear what you said about protection and your negotiation with the other residents in the east and west areas. But if there is identification from, I don't know if it will be the town or from the regional arborist on any trees that are particularly of natural heritage value, I would take that to a higher level of protection in the actual processing of what needs to be done on construction. I think that's important to protect those trees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Potter. Councilor Bradzi, did you?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just wanted to kind of touch on, and Member Potter, kind of with the clubhouse in the top left corner. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the uses that would go on there, if we'd have any permitted uses that might require additional parking. I mean, it doesn't seem like that would be the case, but just curious.
Member Drew.
Through the chair, thank you again for hearing questions a second time for me. Is there any contemplation, given the design of these units, for having green roof to help the environment?
Yeah, could we have an answer for that question, if possible?
Thank you, everyone. Actually, Mr. Chair, if it's all right, I did write everything down. I'll try to go through them slowly. I'm pretty sure I got everything.
All right, I see that Councillor DeFlavio has his hand up, although procedurally, I'm supposed to get written notification in advance from the rest of council. I'll allow Councillor DeFlavio to speak. Yeah, not for 10
Thank you,
minutes.
Chair. Apologies. Through you, I just had a question. It's not speaking. And if they're going to be answering questions, I figured might as well put it on the queue. It was regarding parkland dedication, and I looked through the report. It's 133 pages. Parkland is only mentioned in the 3.1, but I might have missed it, or 3.2. The policy is mentioned, but how parkland is going to be dealt with is not mentioned. And if it was mentioned in the presentation, I apologize. It's just a question regarding how parkland would be dealt with, and if it was going to be cash in lieu, because we've had a policy in the past of taking waterfront land as parkland, but I can understand if this is an unusual parcel where that wouldn't be relevant. So that was it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor DeFlavio. All right, you've got your questions. I guess you've been recording them, so go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I try my best, Mr. Chair, and if I miss anything, please feel free to repeat. Actually, the first thing is, I don't know if Madam Deputy Clerk can pull up the site plan again really quick. That was good. Yes, please, if you don't mind. It's all right. Yeah, if you can just pull up the site plan when you get a check. Yes, yes, and if possible, zoom in to the, oh boy, the right side where it says 18 Jacobs Landing. Best you can. So I'll go through the questions sort of one by one here. I'll do my best to answer them. I think one of the gentlemen here mentioned about a 0.9 meter setback, and I believe this is what that gentleman was referring to. It refers to the closest point of the curb to the property line. So I believe in our bylaw, we recognize the location of the driveway, technically, adjacent to the property line, but there's a pinch point there at 0.9. And the reason why that is there to provide car turning movement, coming in and out of the visitor spaces, and the driveway there. If it doesn't answer your question, I'm certainly happy to stay and we can discuss it further. Regarding visitor parking, there's two banks, and maybe I'll wrap these sort of all together. There was some discussion about the clubhouse and how it interacts with the visitor parking. So the clubhouse is exclusive use amenity for the residents of this, or the future residents for this development. That is it. The intent is there may be like a fitness room there, and there may be like a room that, you know, tenants can, excuse me, not tenants, owners, a part of the condominium can use for, you know, gatherings, barbecue, things like that. That's the intent. It's not the intent to be like a public clubhouse that anyone can kind of go to. It's strictly amenity for the residents there. You know, and so, yeah, well, there will be some visitor parking, but, you know, there's cars on the driveway and there's also visitor parking as well. Staff didn't ask us for a parking study when we submitted, and we felt that the number of visitor parking spaces is appropriate for how many units we have. So that's, I hope I answered that question. There's some question about materials, and I think Craig is here. I don't know if he wants to just mouth me what we're looking at with materials. I think we want to avoid EIFs. That's what we want to avoid, right, Craig?
Materials are stucco, stone casing, and concrete and metal siding with wood.
Sorry, just for what Craig was saying. So we're looking at a mixture of eaves, stone, and other materials on the site. But through site plan, we would finalize that with staff. Sorry, what did you want me? Yeah. Okay. There was someone online that mentioned about consulting. Maybe just to be very specific, we consulted the immediate neighbors to the east and west. The gentleman online didn't tell me where they lived, so I assume they weren't one of the 3 houses on the east side or the neighbor on the west side. So that was that answer about neighbor consulting. There was a question about energy efficiency, which is a great question. We're trying to get that question time and time again. It's something we're going to take back and look into now that you've mentioned it. At this stage, at the zoning stage, we don't typically go in and fully design the buildings for, say, building permit stage, but now that it's been mentioned and we hear this comment again and again, we can certainly look at that through site plan and make it a priority.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, when you do go back and look at it, if you could actually target net zero ready at a minimum. That way, at least they're ready to be upgraded come the future to become net zero.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. There was also a question about the geotechnical report and the water table. Noted, based on the data we have now, we think that we could fit full basements. Now, through the draft plan of subdivision, there will be a number of conditions which will involve updates to that geotechnical report to confirm that we're not hitting the water table or anything like that. But certainly duly noted and something that our geotechnical consultant will have to deal with for sure. I believe one of the members mentioned a slide that showed the privacy fence with the rear yard and potential overlook onto the neighbors. So yeah, I appreciate the comment. A couple of things I want to bring up. And it shows this on the site plan. If we're talking about the single 16, 17, 18, 19, they are set back 6 meters from the property line with a fence. I appreciate that perspective view looks like they're kind of right on the fence looking over, but they will be set back. So that'll help mitigate a little bit as well. The other thing I want to know is the as of right height in this zone is 9 meters. So we're going up to 10, but the only reason why we're going up to 10 is not to accommodate that second floor. That second floor, and I have a slide showing this in the sections, the second floor only goes up to 7.4 meters, which is permitted as of right. What is bringing us over is that sort of vestibule area on top that is set back. So we need a technical amendment to address that increase in height. So I just wanted to mention that about the overlook. There was a question about the shore wall. I hope Milo is on the Zoom call. I don't know, Milo Sturm, who can specifically answer that question. He's our shoring expert. There he is.
Thank you, Ryan. Mr. Chair, through you. The design life of the protection works that we have designed so far, it's not a final design, it's preliminary design, but we're looking for a design life of 50 years. That is a relatively high standard. And the maintenance requirements, I think that was the other part of the question. Typically, there is essentially no maintenance in the first 25 years. There may be some maintenance after that, but it's typically minimal.
And maybe, Mr. Chair, Milo, do you want to confirm who would be responsible for the maintenance in this condominium?
Well, I think that depends on how the condominium is set up. I am not aware of those conditions. It would typically be the owner. If the structure is owned by the condominium, then the condominium would be responsible. If it becomes some kind of a part of dedication to the town, then the town would become responsible. But I'm not aware of where those discussions are.
Thanks, Milo. I think my client's position is that it would be a condominium asset and the condominium maintenance fees would pay for the maintenance after 25 years. So just to clarify, I hope I clarified that. The birds. So actually that idea about the habitat holes in the wall came from our ecologist. He's done some research in Quebec and they've done it there and it's worked. So with with good results. So we're bringing that to the development. So I hope that answers your question. Certainly appreciate the comment about native species. We received that comment from staff as well. We've already relayed that to our landscape architect. Our next iteration of the landscape plan certainly will include all native species. That is no problem on our end. Regarding any important trees, so unfortunately, I don't have the detailed arborist report with me today. It's a good comment. We'll go back to our arborist, ask him if there's any specific trees identified. But the arborist report, to my knowledge, was reviewed by the MPCA, as well as regional staff, and they haven't identified any very significant trees. But it's certainly a comment I can take back and confirm for sure with our arborist. Yeah, and then the last comment I have here is related to a green roof, and just similar to before. Craig just put these renderings together a couple weeks ago. We haven't gotten into that detailed design, but we note your comments about net zero. We note your comments about energy efficiency. We can include those details in the future site plan application for sure. It's just that the building design hasn't been fleshed out to that detailed building permit stage, because of course we're at the zoning stage. So I hope I answered questions today. If there are any more questions, I'm certainly happy to discuss.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Any further questions from the public? Walter? All right, okay, go ahead.
Just to answer through the chair, just to answer Councillor DeFlavio's question regarding waterfront access, the town has requested a public access easement to the northwest corner of the site, and we'll be requesting cash in lieu for the remaining amount, and details of the layout of that easement and the routing will be dealt with at a future site plan stage. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kayla. All right, seeing no further questions, thank you everyone for the participation in the public meeting. The consultants and staff will take back your feedback, and please contact staff at planning@grimsby.ca if you have any additional comments or questions about the proposal after this evening. The public meeting is now closed. Thank you. All right, can I get a mover and seconder for approval of the agenda? Councillor Bradzi, Councillor Frake. Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor Frake. Resolved that the December 11th, 2023 Planning and Development Committee agenda be approved. All in favor? That's carried. Just want to note to everyone that we're continuing the planning meeting, so if you have further conversations, if you could just take it out to the lobby. Thank you. All right, can I get a mover and seconder to receive the previous minutes? Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Member Drew. Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Member Drew. Resolved that the November 22nd, 2023 Planning and Development Committee minutes be received. All in favor? That's carried. All right, discussion reports. Can I have a mover and seconder to get PA 23-40 on the floor for discussion? Councillor Bradzi, Councillor Frake. right, Michaela, we're ready.
Good evening, everyone, Mayor Jordan, councilors, members of Planning Committee. My name's Michaela Bray, planner with the town of Grimsby, and I'm here to present report PA 2340. And this is the recommendation report for 260 Main Street East for their application for an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment on the site. So the location of the site, the subject lands of these applications is 260 Main Street East, right at the intersection with Park Road South. This slide shows both the site that is the subject of these applications, as well as the adjacent site directly to the east, 264 Main Street East, which these applications kind of facilitate development that's actually going to be happening on the site next door. But I'll get a bit into that further. So I just want to note that last month, I believe it was November 21st, the consent application or a consent application went to the Committee of Adjustment, and that was to sever the easternmost part of land on the subject lands. And the intent of that is to merge that land that was severed with the adjacent lands at 264 Main Street East to increase the available parking at the adjacent lands. So this increase in parking on the adjacent lands is mostly going to be on that severed parcel that will be merged with it. So all the development is kind of happening right in that center part between the dwelling on the subject lands and the existing commercial building on those adjacent lands to the east. So for the proposal, as I mentioned, the applications are for the lands at 260 Main Street East. That it's an OPA and ZBA. And I'll get into details on that. The zoning bylaw amendment really applies to the full extent of the subject lands at 260. The zoning and the official plan only is going to apply to that part, which was severed by the Committee of Adjustment last month and pending being merged onto the adjacent lands. But I have slides with more detail on that coming up. I'm just going to go over some of the process for this application. So this kind of relates to the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment only. As some of you are aware, there have been other applications on these lands and the adjacent lands, such as the consent I was mentioning, and a previous minor variance from about 2 years ago. That variance was just to allow some reduced parking with the condition that part of that commercial building on the adjacent lands wasn't being used. So for the OPA and ZBA, the initial pre-consultation was in May of last year. We received the application submission February of this year. We got all the materials and deemed it complete by the end of March of this year. Since then, we've been doing review both from the town as well as external agencies. We did the public open house back in April, the public meeting in September. We've been doing analysis ever since, and we've gotten to the point in the application that we're comfortable giving a staff recommendation to the planning committee right now. And depending on the planning committee's decision today, the recommendation, that will go to council on December 18th to be ratified. So as part of the planning review, all of the plans were circulated, including to the region. So regional planning staff has evaluated the applications against provincial and regional planning policy, and they've they are of the opinion that the proposal meets the intent of the regional official plan, the provincial policy statement, and any other relevant provincial or regional policies. So getting more into the application, just a review. So currently, the official plan designation of the subject lands, which I've got outlined in green on that diagram there. The current designation is low-density residential. And the proposed official plan amendment, so Area A is where the official plan amendment is applicable to, and that would be redesignating from low-density residential to the neighborhood commercial area designation. And that neighborhood commercial designation would match what is on the adjacent lands at 264 Main Street East. So that kind of sliver rectangle of land that's going to be merged, it would all end up being neighborhood commercial. Area B is going to maintain its low-density residential area designation. It's also going to maintain the heritage dwelling and its residential use on it. So there's no change to that area for the official plan amendment. Going over the zoning, so the current zoning for the subject lands is a Main Street zone with no site specifics. And the zoning amendment does apply to the entire site, so both parts A and B. So part A, which is that land that's going to be merged with the adjacent lands, it's currently that Main Street zone, and it's going to be rezoned to neighborhood commercial, which will match the adjacent lands at 264, except this small strip rectangle area A is going to have its own site-specific zoning, and that's related to a reduced landscaping strip, a reduced parking lot setback, and a reduced parking space setback from the road. Area B is being rezoned from a Main Street zone with no site specifics to a Main Street zone with site specifics. So we're really just adding a couple site specifics to legalize some of the existing conditions. So when that parcel, part A, is merged with the adjacent, it's going to reduce that interior side yard setback. So it's just to legalize a reduced setback from the existing accessory building, which is a garage, to what would be their side or their rear lot line. So now I'll get into the planning review. So as I mentioned, the subject lands are currently designated low-density residential area. And the intent of that is to protect and enhance the existing character while also permitting new development that is compatible with what's existing. So a majority of the subject lands, so Part B, which is majority of the land area, is going to maintain this low-density residential intent. So the entirety of the frontage on Park Road South is going to keep this low-density residential area designation. And a majority of the land facing Main Street East is also going to be keeping this low-density residential designation as well. And then, as I mentioned, Part A is going to be neighborhood commercial. And the intent of that is to meet like daily, day-to-day shopping needs, weekly shopping needs of the surrounding residents. And I also wanted to touch on municipal principle number 10 in the official plan, which promotes using existing infrastructure and not sprawling. So site layout and design compatibility. There's not a lot of changes to this one. So all the buildings that exist on the subject lands as well as the adjacent lands are going to remain as is. So as I mentioned, the heritage building will be maintained and used, continued for residential use, as well as their accessory building. And then the existing commercial building is going to be continued to be used, and that won't be changing. So all that's really changing is the parking, and a majority of that change is happening in that area A that I've touched on. That's where the parking lot expansion is going to be going. So I also wanted to note that the Grimsby Heritage Advisory Committee has requested that the appropriate vegetative screening is going to be implemented between the new parking lot expansion and that existing heritage building. So that's something that will be further refined during the site plan stage. And then I also wanted to note that this commercial building on the adjacent lands, it's highly visible from Main Street East. So by expanding that parking lot and allowing for more uses to go in because they'll have sufficient parking, it just affords additional businesses, commercial uses and such to have, to be able to take advantage of this highly visible site on a fairly busy thoroughfare in the east end of town. So I'm going to go over the parking. That really is the main part of this application. So just starting with the subject lands, that residential dwelling, they're going to be keeping that minimum 2 parking spaces. That's required by Section 5 of the zoning bylaw. They likely have multiple times over that, but that's going to be maintained. And then on the adjacent lands, they currently have 29 parking spaces. And they've been able to prove that there can be around 47 parking spaces in result. And where that comes from is that, that medical clinic portion of the building, it's proposed to be about 500 square meters, and using the parking rate of 1 space for 15 square meters, that requires 33 parking spaces for that use. And then the remaining 342 square meters of the building that's not being used for the most part right now, that's kind of necessitating this application. For a general commercial use, it would be 1 parking space for every 30 square meters, and that therefore requires an additional 12 spaces. So if we were going to base the parking off of medical clinic use and then general commercial uses, the total number needed would be 45. They have shown that they can go over that by a few spaces. And then also this zoning bylaw amendment and official plan amendment, it assumes the maximum number of parking needed. So we don't have complete confirmation on what that general commercial use is, but there is potential that it will not require that amount of parking. And that the parking may be less than 45 required spaces. So it's possible that there could be less parking on the site depending on what the use is, but this just assumes the maximum number of spaces and what those uses could be. So this site, it would be the adjacent site, 264. It is subject to site plan approval through bylaw 2251, and that'll address the goals outlined in the official plan section 9.7.6. It includes a review of lighting, grading, drainage, servicing, layout, and that'll come soon, likely in the new year. So I'm just going to go over some of the strategic priorities from council. So the priority here is responsible and progressive growth through developing a strong plan for how the community grows and implementing policy through regulations such as the zoning bylaw and official plan. So the staff recommendation for this is that planning staff are supportive of the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment, and are supportive of the draft bylaws included in the appendices to be recommended for approval by council at the next meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation, Michaela. Questions or comments from members? Member Drew?
Thank you for your presentation. In previous meetings on this, the changes in this bylaw, there was concern expressed related to the privacy for the residential property on 260. So my understanding is there's going to be a fence, and then beyond that, there was consideration of landscaping that might also help that. Can you give us a status of that?
Yep. So to Member Drew, through the chair, so one of the recommendations that the Heritage Committee provided is that there be vegetative screening between this parking lot expansion on 264 and the adjacent or the subject property of this application 260. So we would implement that through the site plan phase, and we would also implement any other mitigative factors such as fences at that stage as well. And that would all be in the agreement for the site plan stage, which I believe will be starting early next year.
Through the chair, yeah, thank you for your response. You had said that in your presentation. I didn't realize that that was applying to that particular area. Thank you.
Any further questions? Again, thank you for your presentation. We have PA 2340 moved by Councillor Bradsey, second by Councillor Frey. Resolved that report PA 23-40 applications for official plan amendment 26 OP-16-2301 and zoning bylaw amendment 26 Z-16-2301 at 260 Main Street East dated December 11th, 2023 be received, and that the draft official plan amendment attached to the report as Appendix A be recommended for approval, and that the draft zoning bylaw amendment attached to the report as Appendix B be recommended for approval. All in favor? That is carried. All right, no correspondence. Any other business? Seeing none, our next Planning and Development Committee meeting is scheduled for January 25th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.